So let's understand about S3. So before getting into the details of S3, let's just create one bucket, and then it will be easier to understand that faster. So I'm going into the cloud projects. Let me actually take something called S3 basics, and we can actually start the lab here. Create a bucket. It's very simple. We go in there, and we mention the name as my bucket. Right? One thing that you should be aware of is if the names that you create should be actually unique. For example, if I go and say create the bucket here, you will get an error most probably, because someone would have already taken the name in the bucket with this particular name. So I add some variables to just make it unique. Now if we go and create the bucket, it will get created because that name nobody would have taken. Right? Once you have the bucket, you can actually go and upload the objects here. So for example, all I can do is I can say add files into this, and I can say add a file here, right? So this is how you upload the objects into that. So anything that you upload in a bucket are called as objects. So I can go to the particular bucket, click on the here, and then I can click, if I click on the actions and say edit storage class. So now if I click on it, it will give me an option if there are different options available in terms of what kind of class, storage class you want to store. It will show me different options there. By default it will be standard, but I can actually move it to something called intelligent tiering or standard IA. These are all different classes. When I say classes, think of it like different options. Each one will come with different characteristics. For example, if we store it in standard class, it is getting stored in more than 3 availability zones, right? And so there are different fees applicable for classes. If I store it in something called one zone infrequent access, it will get stored only in one basically. The first one is how do I actually transfer the data? What all options I have? If I have a large file, is there something I can do? So obviously there is something called transfer acceleration that you can enable in a bucket. I'll quickly show you where is exactly it is done. So if you go into the S3 here, let me go to my bucket. Let me go back to my bucket here, and let me click on this and look at properties here. So for the entire bucket, what I can do is there is something called transfer acceleration I can enable. It will be somewhere here. Yeah. So if you enable this, what happens is when you are uploading, it will happen much faster. So the use case will be, if suppose you are actually having a large file to transfer and you want that to happen very fast, and it's a frequent use case. For example, you are uploading a large movie, maybe around 3 TB, 4 TB of movie at a very frequent basis. In that case, you can enable transfer acceleration there for your bucket so that the transfer happens faster. Now coming to this, the next thing that you should be looking at is there is something called multi-part upload. This is a similar feature that you can enable in your S3 bucket. So what happens here is whenever you are uploading any particular file which is a very big size, if you enable that, the file gets split into multiple options and multiple smaller files, and the file gets, when they suppose in for some reason if the transfer actually breaks or the file doesn't get uploaded, it again gets the whichever files that you have uploaded will not get re-uploaded again. So that is the benefit of this data transfer. So now the other part that we will be looking at is something called data management. So data management is once you have stored some data into your bucket, what is that you can do? How do you actually make sure that you are managing the data? For example, my basic requirement would be once I store, after 30 days it should go into a less expensive kind of storage. So for that we leverage something called life cycles. So again, life cycles will come somewhere here. Let me go into this bucket. So this is the bucket. So I went in there, and you can actually apply lifecycle policies here. For example, I can actually edit storage class. This is one way of actually moving your object. That is one way, or you can even apply something called lifecycle rules here. So you can start creating a lifecycle rule saying that, hey, for this particular object, or for this particular bucket, let's create a lifecycle rule. So what it will do, I can name it like something like 30-day rule. The idea here is, if you once you apply this rule for this particular bucket, so you can actually write a rule saying that I need all objects to be transferred from expensive, that is standard access, to a glacier after 30 days. So you can write such rules into that. So that is the concept behind having a lifecycle policies over here, or lifecycle rules, right? Okay. So intelligent tiering, it is nothing but you are, instead of you writing the rules, you can actually give permissions to AWS to do that for you. So what AWS will do is automatically it will just check, and if the particular file is not being accessed very frequently, it will automatically move that into a lesser expensive storage in S3 storage classes. And obviously you have the classes there which we saw. So by default it will be standard. If you want, we can actually move it to different classes when you're storing the object into a bucket. Now let's go into the protection. The protection is, once you have some objects actually added into your S3 bucket, how do you actually make sure that they are protected? So you have two options. One thing is versioning. Versioning actually gives you something like a GitLab kind of behavior, where it will actually version control will be there, so that you can always go back to the previous version. And there is something called MFA delete. So what MFA delete will do is, if you enable it for deletion, it will ask for a multi-factor authentication, something like a PIN that might get generated in your mobile or something of that sort, where you make sure that the deletion doesn't happen accidentally. There is also something called cross-region replication that can be done. So basically what it means is that it will replicate your data content from one region to another region, for example from US to Europe, right? We will look into it in much more detail. Let's understand just the basics part. We'll get into much more details in the further classes, right? And S3 object lock is something like, you can lock an object. Once you store object in a bucket, you can actually lock it so that nothing can be done to that. It can neither be updated, edited, or deleted. Let me quickly show you where the versioning is. So if you can go back to the bucket of this and look at the properties of this bucket, there is something called bucket versioning. So you can go there, edit it, and just enable it. By default it will be disabled, so you just enable that. So that enables your bucket versioning there. So coming to the last part, there is something called advanced features. These are static website hosting in the S3 bucket. The other parts are you can enable encryption in the S3 bucket, and you have event notification, and then you have present URLs and costs. We will actually deal with the advanced features in further topics in the interest of time. Hope the S3 introduction was useful. Just remember, from S3 learning the S3 perspective, you need to understand how do I transfer the data, how do I manage the data, and how do I protect the data. This covers the basics. Then once you're comfortable with that, we will do another lab or get into another session where we'll actually talk about the advanced features of it. In the next section, we will actually deal with a small lab where we actually repeat the exercises what we have done, just to get comfortable with our S3 concepts. Thank you.